Hello and welcome to Starcodes Astrocast. I'm here with one of my favorite astrologers, Jenn Zahrt. And I want to hear all about your story as an astrologer, what you're thinking on the wild aspects of this year, and about the library that you've started. First, I'd love to hear, and I want to say to the people, Jen Zart's one of my favorite astrological teachers because she has a real education on education in her background and really knows how to teach and to get complex ideas across in a way that doesn't just bore you, but engages your heart and engages your soul. And I think that's a real gift of a good teacher. We sit around and talk pedagogical theory at our house because my last partner was a professor and my present one is a professor, teacher. And so we just talk about how to teach, what works and what doesn't. So thank you so much for your contributions towards that. And tell me a bit about your journey as an astrologer. Where did you start? How did you begin?
All right. Well, thank you, Heather, for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be with you here today. And you're also one of my favorite astrologers, so it's mutual.
Wonderful.
And I love your love of learning and teaching and also thinking about how we teach, because that's a really important part of the process. It's not just a matter of amassing all of the techniques for oneself, but transmitting them to others in a way that allows them to proliferate. So my beginning with astrology starts way far back, right? If it's a station wagon, I'm in the trunk as a kid, 15 years old. 15 when I first started with astrology. And I want to say just up front, I didn't see clients for pay until 19 years after my first introduction. So when people are saying, oh, I'm learning astrology, I've been doing this for 3 years, I want to see clients, I'm like, that's cool, but you can wait a whole year.
I started at 14 myself, and that was my first astrological download from a person, a teacher. So it's amazing. And then it percolates and grows in you. It's not something you can just spit out.
Well, this was almost like a rear end, because when I was in that way far back and I sort of got my teeth into astrology, it was a pretty immediate, I mean, if I was going to say I was ever given a bolt out of the blue from spirit, from that moment, pretty much within that first 6 months of learning about astrology, I said, when I grow up, I not only want to be an astrologer, but I want to integrate astrology into academia.
Brilliant. I was wonderful. And you've done it, yes.
I was angry that astrology was the redheaded stepchild of academic study. And I made my life mission to repair that rift.
See, you're one of what I call the Chaldeans. I think of the people that hit astrology, and it's like we pick up where we left off last time. I could see where it's in momentum already, and we just have to wake it up and take it and run with it and bring this brain up to speed.
Yeah.
So what happened after you were 15? You got that download. You said, I'm going to be an astrologer.
Well, then I became annoying, because then in every class I was in, like, true. No, I have Mars on my daytime and I own it. So in every class I took from that point, I'm talking sophomore in high school, I would find a way to weave astrology into the classroom discussion.
Wow.
All the way until the end. I graduated with my PhD when I was 32. Or sorry, not 32. I was in school until forever. I was 29. But after that, I went to the University of Wales Trinity St. David to get the master's degree after my PhD, so that I could get a degree that had astrology in the title. Because in the state of Washington, you can teach a subject if you have a terminal accredited degree in that subject. So I said, okay, if I ever
so fantastic,
high school, I've got to get the MA in cultural astronomy and astrology. So I did that. Literally every single class, I found a way to talk about astrology. And the teachers and the professors were like, who is this person? Why won't she keep quiet about this? Why does this always have to come up? And I'm like, because you have no idea how incredibly infused it is in the history of human culture. And the fact that you don't know that means that I actually don't know if I can respect your authority until you hear the good word of the stars. It was not evangelical, though. I didn't ever try to convince anyone. It was very much just have you noticed that this is linked to that? And this, oh, really? Oh, you know what?
And astrology is the language that brings the metaphor that happens in our mundane world, our metaphysics, our politics, our health. We see that same pattern echoing on all the realms, and we can follow that back through history. Go ping, ping, ping. It's amazing. It's such an organizing set of patterns.
Right. It's literally everywhere. Once you start looking, you can't
everywhere.
See it.
I absolutely agree. So tell me about how did you end up in Germany and getting a degree, your PhD in German?
So that was
Other
part of,
obscure languages, right? Other
yeah,
complex
right.
languages,
So,
right?
well, I mean, if I'm going to talk about my chart for a second, everything's in the
Mm-hmm.
ninth house.
Okay.
So when you put everything in the ninth house, you not only have astrology, which is supposed to be there, but also foreign language. So
Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
speaking and learning
Mm-hmm.
foreign languages because I love what it
Mm-hmm.
does to the way your mind thinks. Like there are
Yeah.
thoughts that you can think in another language that you cannot think in English. So I sort of wanted to collect them all.
In German, it's very complicated, and you can add on
Well,
qualifiers
that's the
forever.
funny thing. I have German ancestors. So when I
Mm-hmm.
began learning German,
Gottschalk was my maiden name, right?
it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, German's hard." And I'm like, maybe for you, but for some reason, this to me is like a key and a lock. Like, I get it. So I picked it up
Mm-hmm.
super fast. And it just so happens that my first German teacher was also a professional astrologer.
Wonderful.
So I said, okay, I'm looking at the amazing careers of the astrologers who I'm reading about now at the age of 15, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Patrick Curry had written a PhD thesis about British astrology in high and low culture. Nicholas Campion was working on his
Oh
PhD,
yes. Yep. Yep.
finishing it. And I thought to myself, this is the actual truth. I said, when I grow up, I want to be the German version of Nick Campion. So what does that mean? I need to go get my PhD in German and learn German fluently so that I can bring translations of German astrological texts forward and write the
Mm-hmm.
history of
Mm-hmm.
astrology in Germany.
Mm-hmm. And it was so much more integrated into the culture earlier in German. My grandfather, who left, he ran away from Germany when he was 15 or 16, went to South Africa, learned to make and came over with a piece of equipment to America, had in the little notebook that I have when he's first learning how to write English writing, an astrological chart that he had done all the math and figured out.
Amazing.
And, there was no other sign of mysticism in that side of the family at all. So it was
Incredible.
fairly common a part of life
Yeah.
back then. And that
Yeah.
was pre-World War II.
Right. There was an
World War
amazing
One, pre-World War One. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
renaissance of astrology from even in the 1890s forward
Mm-hmm.
up to when the Nazis shut everything down in 1941. There was an amazing explosion of astrological knowledge, distribution, but also innovation and technique. One of the most incredible developments of astrology in the 20th century happened during the First World War in Germany
Mm-hmm.
with the Hamburg School, who then became known as Uranian astrology, etc.
Fascinating. I also put it as a cautionary tale because there was a real movement in the mystical movement in Germany between the wars, in particular, that I'm thinking of pulling away from politics, of being above all that. And what happens to politics when you remove the spirituality is you get that ruthlessness. They did not stay integrated. Now, the politics, used all the astrological know-how, but
Mm-hmm.
they did not, which, for worse, I gather that Hitler timed a lot of the major battles through astrology. And that's one reason why the American Federation of Astrologers was formed, to try to predict when his astrologers would tell him a battle should begin. And so that process, that it was proving effective, but it wasn't. That how important it is for people on a spiritual and astrological path, because I think they're connected. How can it's the language of seeing the oneness of the universe. How we can stay involved and contribute and lend that moral perspective to the politics, to the military, to the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my, when I see people pulling their spiritual life and the politics, oh, I don't get involved in politics.
Yeah,
Well, this is what happens when you don't.
right. That's a position of privilege.
Yes, it is. It is. So then here you are, you finished your degree, you've been studying astrology in Germany, and then what happens? You've been studying German in Germany and astrology.
Yeah. So then here I am thinking I'm going to try to be a German professor, achieve tenure, and then once tenure happens, which is permanent job security, or was back in the day before academy became more treated like a business project instead of the ivory tower, I had a lot of critiques of that. And I said, I don't want to become a German professor because I don't like the job of professoring. I didn't want to be writing recommendations for this and trying to recruit graduate students and doing seminars. And then also all of these things that got attached to the job of professorship as universities got more and more like businesses. And so I pivoted actually when Kepler College had to have a teach out because they did not achieve accreditation. I thought that I was going to eventually be, going to Kepler for they did offer a master's degree in East-West astrology. And I thought that was where I was headed. So I had to pivot and go to the Sophia Center. And then when Kepler was forced to have their teach out, I said, one institution is an easy target. But if we're going to get astrology to be infused in every university, the way to do that is through the library system. And in order to get into the library system, you need to be into publishing. Again, everything's in the ninth house for me. So the thing about that was, as a graduate student, I found myself in this amazing capacity of being trained in publishing with an interdisciplinary journal. And it was my favorite job in graduate school. I would show up. I was very efficient. I ended up being very good at it. And I did it for 3 years longer than I was supposed to because I loved it so much. And at some point they had to drag me out of there kicking and screaming like, no, Jen, someone else needs to do this. We need to train more people. You're good at this. Why don't you go work for this other publication that isn't in the university system? So I did that too. And then she taught me about her business in a way that I could run my own business. So when I graduated out of that position, it was time for me to be basically a global nomad. And so I went all around the world, visiting astrologers, working with them, publishing them. And I realized I wanted to enter the world of publishing so that we could make intelligent books about astrology that could be citable by academics. And so I started working with Nick Campion. We actually have the Sophia Center Press together, which is a spin-off business at the University of Wales. We publish books about the history of astrology. We've been doing this for 20 years. It's amazing to think about, like, oh yeah, I'm in my midlife now, and this is something that I've been doing for 20 years, right? But it's amazing to look back and see how many feet of shelf space has been created just by a couple of people in 20 years. And so when I realized, okay, we need not only a collection of the books so that we can have efficient research, because right now there's only, including the Celestial Arts Education Library, where I am right now, and another library in Wales run by Philip Graves, and then the AFA library in Tempe, Arizona. There's not many places in the world where you can enter one building and have all of the books that are about astrology in one place.
Yes.
And when I was a graduate student, I'd have to take interlibrary loan and wait for months for something to show up, and then I could only read it for 4 weeks. So I'd have to send it back. And if there was a page I missed that I had to cite again because the next book happened to show up 2 months later, I had a serious research problem. So my founding of CAELI is a solution to that problem, but also a force multiplier, because when people can come here and do research, they're able to create more books, more publications, more shelf space taken up. And when every university library has a whole new section of their library with the books that we're publishing and have published, suddenly they're going to go, why don't we have a department for this? Why don't we have a department for this amazing body of work that's demonstrating how this entire cultural practice has morphed and shifted and emerged from different human cultures throughout entirety of the history of humanity? And we're sitting here acting as though it's just a superstition, right? No.
Well, don't you think that's not a logical process, but it's an a priori assumption that many academics will not question, that they see that pattern, but that pattern, it's not logical why they reject that pattern.
Well, I think with enough published material and with enough
begins to undermine that, and
undermines
see that
it undermines prejudice. Also, the academy is consumptive, so it's chewed through everything we can do in the 20th century in Germany. It's chewed through identity politics. It's chewed through all of the things related to gender studies, starting with Judith Butler and down the line. Now that's on things like occult studies. Now we've become the actual sort of stars of the show, literally, like figuratively stars of the show, because they haven't conquered the others of astrology or of witchcraft or of magic, right? So now that is becoming attractive because people need a thesis and they need to make their way in the sort of capitalization of the academy. So now it is an attractive thing to do
Yes.
astrology. It's an attractive thing to do the history of magic. So we need to also lean into that a little bit and allow that to be the
I'm
way.
all for that. And I just know that there are some people that will never let themselves question it because that shakes their worldview too much.
Yeah, but they'll die. And
But yeah,
they're totally ready.
And there is room, I think, in all the people willing to question and willing to look at it.
Yeah, it's a type of shift. I mean, if we're looking at the current shift into the age of air, shift into what S.J. Anderson has called the Barbeau basket, which I need to say he's the one that said that. It's not Barbeau who said basket. We have a true shift into understanding. If kids these days are growing up with algorithms, astrology is the original algorithm set. It's de facto. It's there. They get it. It's completely there. Right? What's the first thing people do when they're making an AI software? They make astrology software.
Yep.
Because it's the code, right? So, we're entering a time when we can actually be out, be proud, and be the leaders of helping the rest of humanity remember astrology.
And all the potential for the patterns, for the freedom of it, not the predestination. It depends. I think that comes down to whether or not you are using astrology as an excuse to say this is precluded, this is going to happen, or as a potential for how can we use this pattern, and it frees us to see even more, to open our sphere rather than close it down.
Absolutely.
And that's so much about how it's used. And you mentioned Barbeau basket. I was calling it the sign of 4 before,
I love
but
it.
that's an old Sherlock Holmes reference. But and this on Sunday, the moon moved into the other corner and created this beautiful pattern. And I've taken out the asteroids just to make it a little bit simpler.
Yeah.
But just for the people, this is such a trigger point, not for an event, is what I saw, but the shift of an era and the beginning and the seeding of an experience. And going back and looking throughout history at the Uranus, it's a beautiful Uranus trine that's going to be five chances of this. That when I found out that the Gutenberg Bible was printed under a Uranus-Pluto aspect, and every major leap forward in technology throughout the history has been when Uranus and Pluto are talking to each other. And that's only one corner of this. This basket is woven out of very familiar but unusual aspects. But we've been through each piece of this before, a version of it, all at the same time. I haven't been able to find a precedent for it. What do you, what is your feeling of like all the shift in the last 2 years between these outer planets being in those yin, water, and earth signs to fire and air, and the trigger that they're setting off in this network here? I see so many people thinking it's it's like that everything is going to wake us up and it's going to change everything. I think it pushes the change. It pushes evolution. It asks us to look bigger. It asks us to see the interaction. I don't see it as solving any problems overnight. What do you see?
I don't think anything can solve overnight.
I agree.
Right.
I just wish that wishful thinking that wastes our time.
When we're in the middle of a shift this big, it makes me want to reference when East Germany was dissolving as a nation state, which was around another Saturn-Neptune moment, right?
It was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction when the Berlin Wall fell.
Exactly. So in the midst of that, the people
Dissolving the
who were
wall.
living in East Germany weren't necessarily wanting their state to dissolve. They wanted something like a third creation. And when Saturn-Neptune happened and the Berlin Wall fell, what was East Germany got absorbed, quote unquote, back into Western Germany, and the Western German ways took over, and this third option failed to form. And
I have a piece of the wall right here.
Oh, amazing. I lived with East Germans when I was an exchange student in 1998, so it was still very fresh. The infrastructure was still in the process of getting upgraded. And when people were gathering in Leipzig on the Monday demonstrations, it started in the churches and then they went out into the streets, and they were not aware at the beginning of how powerful their movement was
Mm-hmm.
And I think only in retrospect, in years of retrospect, were they able to process and digest what was happening. So I feel like we're in the middle of the Monday demonstration right now. We don't know how this is going to shake down, play out, and yet also thinking about the shift when we go back to 2020 and the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, we're in the very early ages of the crowning of the age of air from the age of Earth. And you see these spasms of people who built their entire, not just their entire lives, but entire industries for the last 200 years organized around extraction of Mother Nature, organized around exploitation of material, of what our relationship to the earth element is. And now we're seeing, oh, we're in the age of air now. We can't do those things anymore. They don't work anymore. And we're still acting as though it's going to be that way. But think about what it's like to be, you know, embedded into the East German state and suddenly there's no state apparatus. What do you do? How do you function? Your entire 40 years of being is programmed to do one thing. And now that literally doesn't exist anymore. How do you realize that it's not there? How do we understand our financial services sector is completely upended by AI? Right?
Yes, like completely. See that as a complete revolution, like the Industrial Revolution. And we couldn't see when suddenly there was no cottage industry for weaving. It was suddenly now you have to go to the factories. We couldn't even begin to see. With the distance, we go, but what it did to the daily life, it had to be totally reconfigured. And I do think AI is just beginning on that.
Well, and I see it also happening in my own personal relationship to publishing, whereas, you know, even in my own life, I built my entire world around publishing books, publishing articles, teaching other people how to publish and, you know, how to write well and how to be legible by the Academy. And, you know, in the last year or so, I've actually had a personal come to Jesus or reckoning, I don't know what you would call it, of what is my relationship to information at this point? Because there are people who didn't learn German for 30 years and learn how to become fluent in it, who can simply pick up AI, translate articles, think they know what they say, and then regurgitate back to me all of these things that I spent 20 years becoming an expert in, literally doctoral candidate, PhD person, right? Which I take as more of a way of like, you know, it's like a video game. When you have a PhD, you can unlock other rooms, but it doesn't mean you're better than anyone. It just means that you're very obedient. So
and that you've proved it. You can start at this point now. That's right.
But there are people who don't have any of those credentials who can go to AI, translate, you know, pop some German things in there, and then regurgitate back to me what they think the AI is saying about it as if they're on par. And I'm like, okay, that's really weird because I feel like now a little obsolete given I did all of these old school ways of like, okay, become fluent in the language and learn how to do all of these things. And like,
I remember you learning how to bookbind.
Yeah, you can write a thing, you know.
That is the art form that was. But now
typeset with lead type, which I learned was excruciating, and I didn't want to actually do it. It was too earthy for me, right? So, you know, in that sense, it's like, okay, well, now what's the next step of being engaged in this project, right? So gathering the books in a place where humans can gather to me is becoming more important than, for me personally, creating more materials to put on those shelves.
That's the air part of it, creating a space. And just for the audience, why did you say we went from Earth to air sign?
Okay, so we're looking at the long history of the world.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of things you will look and say, oh, astrology is silly because they have two zodiacs. Can't they decide what's going on? So back in the 900s, some very smart Arabic era people, right, astrologers, said, we can't actually tell you where the zodiac starts and stops, but what we can tell you with clockwork precision is when these two lights conjoin every 20 years. We can tell you exactly where they're going to be. We can set our watch by it. And also, if we look at the larger pattern of where those planets are conjoining, we see them shifting in the space against the backdrop of the fixed stars. And what they came up with was a theory of trigon shifts. This is also in the history of science, so it's not, you know, this is accepted by the history of science. Trigon shifts are when the planets Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in a different element of the zodiac over a period of time. So every 20 years they conjoin, and you can also see this in the history of the United States with Tecumseh's curse.
Certainly can, yes.
And so this is a very important astrological clock or astronomical clock for us to see where in time are we. And every 200 years, those
are the two biggest planets by far. Jupiter's 2.5 times bigger than all the other planets put together. Saturn's right up there. So when those two come together, it's such a...
If you're watching the sky every night, every 20 years, you're going to see them coming back together and then coming back together if you live that long, right? And so they're documenting this. And every 200 years, those conjunctions happen in a different element of the zodiac. And when that happens, what they noticed was the entire structure of society has oriented itself to a different focus. We need to orient to a separate focus. So this is an 800-year cycle, and we see this happening in threes, right? You have one element is like you have it in Aquarius, where it just started in 2020, and then the next time it happens, it's going to be in Gemini, then it's going to be, or wherever it goes, right? It goes in that air circuit. We had one in Libra in 1982 and 1983. So you have
back into Earth signs. That was the year when the year that Reagan got shot in the lungs and developed dementia. And so we have, because it affects the presidency every 20 years.
Right.
So that
mental shift now is not only the beginning of a new element, but it's actually an even larger start because that 800-year cycle is now resetting. So we're looking
we see that also echoed this time with Pluto going through Capricorn again for the reprieve from 2008 until 2020 and to now. It's been going back and forth into Aquarius, going from Earth sign into Aquarius. And it felt like that really underlined the change from Earth to air. And the extractive extremity of Pluto in Capricorn was the extraction, and also it brought all the dictators out of the woodwork. And now we are into the how do we as the people have a voice, and the people's voice only is as important, as competent as the people, the wisdom of the people involved. So yes, so we're in this new era. Take it away. And I interrupted you to clarify for our audience, and I wanted to...
Oh, it's okay.
Great stuff.
Yeah. No, I think, we all have to think about what our relationship is to information, where we're getting it, what its source is, what is our relationship to AI and the damage it's doing to the planet itself in that way. Right? And so I'm always thinking, because of the background in German, you'll notice the Celestial Arts Education Library doesn't have the word astrology in it. Because in the 1930s, anything that had the word astrology in it was immediately attacked by the Nazis. And so I thought to myself, looking at the future, going, America's going to go through a rough patch. Maybe I should be a little more hiding in plain sight. Right. And also in terms of people who are immediately prejudiced against astrology, it's like, well, this is the celestial art, so that's okay. Yep. It makes the acronym CAELI. That's fun. That means of the vault of heaven. I'm pronouncing it wrong. I love that. I've heard from Latinists it should be Chile, and I'm like, no, it's CAELI. It's a person. It's a full name, right? So, but the thing is, like, there are so many nuances to the astrological traditions, plural, that are not clear to people who simply consume information on the internet. And when you step into a building that has all of these books and articles and journals and personal research papers, it does something to your brain, even if you don't look at any of them. Yes. You're now in a morphic field of change in apprehending what humans have done with this. And you realize, wow, the 20th century wasn't all psychological astrology. In fact, modern astrology didn't really exist until the middle of the 50s, because up until that point, people were talking about Manilius, Dorotheus, Pretorius. They were only doing traditional astrology because we didn't have a publication industry that meant that every astrologer who wanted to make a living had to write a book about Chiron after the 1970s, right? So it's like we have a culture industry of astrology that has led to people thinking that it's horrible and superstitious and fake. And it's like if you pop the hood, a lot of people in the 1950s were measuring things to the extent of almost boredom. Right? And you're like, oh my gosh, look at all these graphs and all this data. What's going on here? They're not talking about your soul. They're not talking about psychology. They're trying to figure out where things actually are. We don't even have ephemerides that are up to date. That's the star map where you can see where things are located. They were not calibrated until 2005. Even in the 90s, when astrology was having another moment of robustness due to computing, people were calculating the position of Neptune wrong. People were calculating the positions of the planets and wrong by what? An arc minute? a degree.
Right.
But still, if you're thinking about, we don't know where these things are literally located. You go back even further, there are astrologers in the year 1200 making predictions off of planetary positions that weren't even there, because their locational ephemerides were fuzzy. They weren't in clear vision the way we expect now. So expecting the exactitude of astrology from the position of a hard science is silly, because it was never about that. It was never about the precise... That demand of astrology, I think, is an absurd layering on top of something where it's like, astrology is not claiming that. And yet there are other kinds of astrology where you, like when you make jokes like, well, astrology can't tell you when you're going to leave your house. Well, if you're in Argentina and you're doing ascensional transit, it absolutely will. It absolutely will. And that's just one of the traditions that comes down through the lineage.
And if that's what you want to spend all your time working on, what time you're leaving your house versus what's the meaning of existence and where you're going to work with it, that's up to you. But it's like, where do you bring your mind with it?
Other astrologies that are talking about family lineage. You want to go into genetics? Okay, that's cool. Get your pipette out, get the petri dish, or you can look at your astrological lineage.
Yeah. For many years, I was the staff astrologer for some family therapists back east, and we would go through they would do family maps, and I would do the astrology charts for back 2, 3, 4, 5 generations and watch the repeating patterns and how they shifted and what traced back. Was fascinating to watch it, how you'd see the patterns in the families evolve, repeat, get worse, improve, evolve. It was really amazing to watch. And that, how could I not believe it after that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's eerie once you really, and I think that's part of why some people want it to stay superstitious or somehow not real, is that once you really start looking into it, you're like, oh, I'm embedded in a series of relationships more deep than I can ever fathom. And astrology lays out how deep they are.
Exactly. It lays out how deep they are. But that means you can't apply just a theory. You have to really listen to the power of a symbol. And symbols are inexact. They are, they are multidimensional. They are 360 degrees. And you can't just go, it's going to be this, because you say, how you're going to manifest this, on what level and how, in what direction. There is still soul work. There is grace and free will involved. It's part of the evolution, and that but you can use that symbol to guide that.
Yeah, this people expecting determinism to come from the mouth of an astrologer are inexperienced, because in the history of astrology itself, like nearly zero astrologers ever talk about certainty like that.
Right.
Ever. So this impression that we have of like, well, the astrologer is going to, do this like prediction that's going to be detrimental to you. It's like, well, they're not actually. Have you read them? All of these impressions of what we're doing is coming from not actually engaging the sources. It's a prejudice.
And not actually talking to an astrologer.
Not actually talking to astrologers or reading the dead ones who have left a record of what they were doing. Right. And then comes the other thing of, and this was coming from a historian of science, John Heilbronn, who, may he rest in peace, amazing guy. He was one of my advisors when I was writing my PhD. And he was like, well, sometimes when people would predict the death of a political figure, someone else would make the prediction come true. Right. So it's sort of, you got to be careful when you're talking about politics as well as an astrologer in public, because if someone says, oh, well, there's a threat to the so-and-so on this date in this manner, someone's like, oh, that's a great idea. Let me go do that.
And right? But again, which comes first? That could have happened anyway, even if they didn't have an astrological excuse for it.
Right. But I think that the impression of determinism in astrology needs to be investigated, and thankfully we have Bernadette Brady, who's done that and written an entire PhD thesis, legible by the Academy, about the role of determinism in astrology. Right. That helps us understand we weren't thinking about fate in the ways that non-astrologers think we think about fate.
That was well said.
Right. Okay. So
I agree.
Like, one of the things I've always held up, if you're asking, like, how did I become a teacher of astrology in a way, I'm always thinking about my sisters. How do I explain to my sisters who will never learn astrology how to understand what I'm doing? Why are you doing that? You could be doing so many other things. Why did you get attached to astrology? I'm like, well, I can't not. If you see my chart, it has to be astrology. But when I'm thinking about how do you explain to someone who's not an astrologer?
That's again, you can go back and go like, well, how can you not? I think, but I've studied it and you have not. That's why I understand. Accept this.
Yeah, but you can break it down in a way where you can, if you only have an elevator ride with someone, how do you get them to open their mind
Right.
and to acknowledge.
Observe the patterns. And it is a tool of freedom. It is not a tool of predestination. Though I remember, it's how can you use, and the transit is how I would try to phrase it, rather than what's going to happen to you. And I remember I talked to a client about a very complex Pluto transit back before Pluto moved on the outside of the orbit of Neptune, back in the 90s, when it was inside the orbit of Neptune, and a Pluto transit manifested in a different way than it does now. And I said, if you have a near-death experience, or you kind of have a brush with mortality, could be just around you, I want you to kind of look at how you use that as a trigger to re-examine your family relationships. He said, I haven't talked to them in years. I said, okay. And then do these things, like kind of like have a reason for being alive. It's not a rhetorical question when Pluto says, why are you here? It wants you to search for the real answer. And I heard from her 3 years later and said, I thought of what you said halfway down the 50-foot cliff that broke my back. I said, and when I was on dialysis, I had to go home to the family I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. And we healed our relationship. And then I've gone on to find my purpose. Thank you. But that, it's how can you use it? Not what's going to happen, because we don't know the exact trigger. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily happen to us. It can happen around us. But the trigger asks those questions. Sure. We can take that and run with it.
I had a more lighthearted example.
Please.
I have a prophylactic when Mercury's retrograde, which it is right now.
Excellent. Yes.
Well, what I do is I shop and I unshop. Right? So if you think about the return, renew, I will, when I'm like, I got to get this thing during Mercury retrograde, but it might not be the right size.
Always keep the receipts, right?
No, not just keep the receipts. Buy something else too and take it back. Lean into it, right? Get a little more and then be like, oh, I got too much. Let me return something, right? Knowing it's there.
Be willing to do that, yes.
Mercury, you need me to be a little bit more, indecisive or like sloppy, so I will. Let me just buy something else and then return it on purpose, right? And
That's
then
a beautiful version.
I just noticed it happening, like, oh, cool, Mercury's retrograde. Let me just get another one. Oh, I don't need to. Let me take it back. And you do the ritual, you perform the thing, Mercury feels satisfied, and you move on with your day. And, it's a little, I think of them, my friend Al Cummins was staying at CAELI at one point as the astrologer in residence. And he's like, oh, you've given it a spirit house. I'm like, exactly, right? When we think about
beautiful expression, yes.
Mediation or working with transits or trying to work with the astrology, it's like, what does the energy want to do? Okay, let me give it a place for it to do that, to relieve the tension. Because if I resist doing it, like, oh no, I can't buy anything.
Oh no,
retrograde.
No, yeah, like, no, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah. Though I wouldn't buy tech equipment as Mercury stations. But this last Mercury retrograde, it was, and again, I feel like if I make an offering, then I get the benefit of it. And we were leading a Druid retreat, which is going back and bringing some ancient ways, but mainly about connecting on retreat, connecting to the natural world. The week beforehand, first a flood washed out my driveway, leaving 6-foot holes. So no one could come up our driveway. They had to come in through a field. Investigating that, I dropped my phone in the creek. It died, and I had to have a new one shipped. And the city decided to close down 6 miles of road going to our house to this area to be repaved, and there was an hour-long wait to get through. Great. After that, once people got here, we had a deep, wonderful, heartfelt, fantastic time with no problems. But it was that offering, like, okay, I've done the offering. Now we can go deep with this and use what that Mercury retrograde introspection and retrospection with joy. So it was an interesting example of how often these transits ask you to do your due diligence there.
Right. Yeah. Lean into it. Like,
give it a spirit house. I like that.
Yeah, totally.
That's a great expression. So tell me about some of the astrologers that came into your life along the way.
So
who were some of the turning points?
It began with Gary Lorenzen. So Gary Lorenzen is a mundane astrologer in Portland, Oregon. And he is the one who introduced me to astrology at all. I was in high school and he noticed that I was feeling kind of sad. And he said, well, what time of day were you born? Where were you born? I'm like, what's this guy on about? This is weird, but okay, I'll answer your questions. dude. And then the next day I got my natal chart and he goes, can you go to Powell's Books in Portland? I said, sure. So I do. And he's like, get these books and he literally said let me know if you have any questions. I'm like, okay, I have so many questions. At school, basically just pinging questions at him. And I converted immediately. Like it was, and I say conversion, like there was a before and after of that moment, right? Because I could see after years of, exploring religious things, my stepmom is Jewish, my father is Anglican. So we did all of the things. We went to temple, we went to church, we did all. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to pray, but nothing's answering me. Like, why am I not getting any return on, like, hi, God, da-da-da. And then suddenly here was this beautiful system that was like, not only answers, but specific answers. Right. I was like, okay, now we're cooking.
Now we're cooking.
Also, why doesn't anyone know about this? Right? Like, it was just, how is this not something that's a part of education or like how we bring people up into the world? Because it was so clear. The answers and the information and the self-knowledge was so clear. And it was astonishing to me. So then I moved forward into the world. And my relationship to astrology was pretty localized with Gary. Donna Cunningham was still alive, so I saw her for a moment. And I thought, it was like, when like a baby chick hatches and it's like, are you my mommy? It's like Gary became my, astrology, like first.
Yep.
And because he was a Pluto and Leo guy, like I just thought everybody 30 years older than me was astrologers. So I was, walking around until 2012 when I went to UAC, I literally thought all astrologers were kind of, 30 years older than me. And then I finally met people my own age, and I'm like,
all the astrologers. Yes.
It was like a total ugly duckling moment. I was like, oh wait, okay, cool. Like, then I met Asia Seltzer, who does time passages software, and I met Wonder Bright, who's an amazing friend of mine, who also is an astrologer. And yeah, it just finally realized, oh, I have people in my peer group. That was a total watershed moment.
And us older astrologers were going, yes, there's a new wave coming up. Look at all that good juice coming in.
Yeah, I remember that chatter, and now I'm finding myself, because I remember at that point, it was sort of a generational organized by Pluto. So I'm Pluto and Libra, and we were looking, where are all the Pluto and Virgos? Like, they're around. And then the Pluto and Leos are still gripping onto power, like, they're just still there.
Okay.
Like, come on, let it go. Retire, it's okay, you won't die, and astrology will be just fine. But now
we don't have to retire, we just have to honor this, create the space for the next generation coming in. And that's not easy for the Pluto and Leo. Right.
But not creating the space, all the legacy they've tried to build gets crashed because they haven't transmitted how to carry it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's unfortunate for the people that have tried to do it that way. Right. But now we have Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto in Sagittarius, and even I'm looking at the Pluto and Capricorn people, like, they've been growing up in the current way astrology is transmitted in the world. They're growing up in a way where it's absolutely totally normal. Why wouldn't you? Right. So I'm very excited at this potential.
Excellent. That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Really good to hear.
Yeah. But the other ones, I mean, Nicholas Mutz-Alsop was a major influence on me. I met her through Rod Suskin, who had a school in South Africa. But I met him in the UK at the University of Wales Trinity St. David.
Is that where you met him?
On our master's degree in cultural astronomy and astrology. And I met them both at the same time during a solar eclipse on my IC. Perfect. So it was a completely mind-blowing day. I wake up in a glass pyramid. There's one building in Bath, UK that has a glass pyramid on top. And Chrissy Phillips, another amazing astrologer, happens to own it. And I get this email when I'm going onto the plane. I have no idea where I'm going to stay. And I write to Nick Campion, like, where am I staying? And he goes, Jenn Zahrt penthouse. And I'm like, oh my God, the photos. Who sold the photos? I don't have photos, but I mean, it was like this, what is going on? I'm getting an email from Nick Campion that says Jenn Zahrt penthouse. And it turns out he's like, oh, you're going to stay with Chrissy. I'm like, who's Chrissy and where's this penthouse? So I get to England. I still don't have an email response. I have no way of I don't have an iPhone at that point. I take the train to Bath. I'm sitting at the train station going, how am I going to find this place? I don't have any internet connection. I try to find an internet cafe. Finally get to one. And the time it takes me to walk across town to find the internet cafe, I realized I could have just spent 5 minutes walking in the opposite direction and her building's right there. So I wake up in the glass pyramid the next day. I'm like, like, this is a gorgeous place. And then there's Nikki, who had just moved to Bath and was having some construction done on her home there and wanted a traditional South African home blessing. So Rod is also there as a student at University of Wales Trinity St. David, and we begin doing this South African home blessing. So he's crushing the medicines, and her daughters are there, and we're all like asking him all these questions, like, why are you doing that? What's going on? You know, and then we go through the home from floor to ceiling, pouring libations, doing the South African home blessing ritual. And that was how I met Nikki and Rod. And then from there, they were like, oh, you have to come to UAC in New Orleans. And I'm like, oh, no. I'm still in grad school. I don't know about that. You know, I can't be out as an astrologer while I'm in academia. And they convinced me to go to UAC. And that was my first astrology conference in 2012. And it was just then I met everybody and the whole world blew open. And then that was the beginning of this next phase, right? So, but Nikki, I fell in love with her in that meeting because she was an expert in fertility astrology.
Yep.
And I was really, really, really interested in human reproduction. I even took a class in college about it just to have it on my transcript, human reproduction. I just wanted to know everything about the human body and that idea of, you know, what is the real mechanics of how human beings procreate? And there she was doing the astrology of it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the best of all worlds. I've got astrology and human biology. Put it together and we're making babies. Let's cook. Let's go. Right. And so she and I had a consultation. At that time I was married to my first husband. I'm like, are we going to have a baby? And she's like, you know, I know that's a really cool question. Let's start at the basics. Is this really the right person for you? And I was like, actually, so that kind of was an eye-opener. Because she was naming things that I knew were true. And it was like, let's face those facts before we sit around making babies about it.
Right.
And so, you know, at that point, then I changed my relationship, not because of that conversation or whatever, but she had brought up questions that when I answered them became clear that I was actually not supposed to be in that connection anymore. And I began working with her, and she taught me medieval astrology through her fertility astrology techniques, because that was fascinating. And that then completely changed my relationship to astrology, because at that point I had not been integrating traditional techniques. And that changed everything, because, you know, Gary was a humanistic astrologer, and the humanistic astrological tradition is beautiful. It's really, really solid. I love it. It's my, you know, beginning, but adding medieval on top of that foundation was a game changer for me.
I remember one of our first conversations, I was listening to what a good job you did integrating all the various forms. There were so many people that get their ego stuck in one form of astrology or the other. This is right. That means that must be wrong, rather than this is right. And that's you're right too in that form. And this works for this context, and looking at it as multifaceted rather than separatist right and wrong. And I thought I really appreciated your approach to that.
Yeah, thank you. I have a name for that now, in that I call myself an astrological maximalist.
Love it.
I just take it all. I'm the Liberace of techniques. Like, I will put it, if it's, give me the sequins, give me the ostrich feathers, give me the bric-a-brac. I want all of the haberdashery. Because I love nothing more than test driving a new technique and breaking my astrology like a Ming vase. Like, it's not precious. Break it. See what stays. See what you can.
Exactly. Test it. Test the heck out of it. Right.
And it's amazing when your mind breaks. I love that feeling. I love giving that to other people. Like, break your brain about it for a minute, because you will come back stronger. You will come back more solid in your relationship to it. And you will actually find, I believe astrology is still alive, and it's giving each astrologer a gift. And until we play with it hard enough, we're not going to realize what that gift is. If we stay small inside our first teacher, we're not going to see what that gift is.
Right. Grow it. And acknowledge that your perspective can be absolutely true, and so can this other person's. And it's like watching people surrounding a mountain, each with a different description. It's the hologram as we put them all together that gives us the real impression of what's out there.
Yeah. And I just had a total mind-blowing moment when, you know, those moments of Satori when you're reading astrology or doing it. As above, so below. Like, this might be totally given to people, but just sitting with it, truly taking a moment to sit with it. If we say, as above, so below, and we know we're living in a solar system, and that we all have a natal chart, we have the entire solar system in each one of us, and each thing that happens has a hologram of the solar system in it.
Yep.
And it's not even a matter, because I work a lot with holographic transits, and at UAC I'm going to be speaking about holographic progressions.
Oh, interesting.
When Robert Blaschke is talking about holographic transits, he's talking about a recurrence of a pattern that fits your natal pattern, that unlocks a modicum of free will that's not necessarily always there unless you have that pattern recurring. And I'm like, It's holographic before that even starts, because as above, so below, the entire solar system is in every single one of us.
Mm-hmm.
The hologram doesn't need to be a matchy match. Like, that's coherence, but the hologram's already there.
Mm-hmm.
We're all holograms of each other.
Totally. I agree. I was thinking as you're talking, it stimulates. My mate's a cell biologist, and we talk about how what triggers a cell. That a pattern can be in our genes, but not be triggered to express itself. And an interesting study done how our genes that I saw somewhere that if you focus on a relative, the genes that you have in common with that relative begin to fire and activate. And so you have to kind of think about, and I think about this in astrological patterns along the same lines. I remember working with a client who was searching for her mother. She was in her 40s and had been adopted, and she developed breast cancer as she was searching. When she found her mother was dying of breast cancer, and she went, "This is not mine, and let me hand it back," and went into complete remission.
Wow.
But that was, like, I want to find something else to connect with my mother on besides breast cancer. But
Right.
that the cells started to kind of align and work with that. So I think a lot of my great uncle that died at 102 shoveling snow. Like, let me activate some of those genes. But it can that pattern that we can, thinking of the gifts that come 10 generations back, and you can usually find the astrological parallel to that relative, can help you activate that in you. But it's not going to activate by itself. We have to bring our attention to it. And I
You
think
know,
of that. Some of
has
the
this ever been given as a kind of lecture or article
no,
in your mind? Have you ever seen that? Okay. So
I have not yet.
this is a spiritual technology of astrological medicine that you have to now make an entire presentation about. I'm sorry, you just gave your homework. I'm giving you
Okay, I'll take it from you.
because it's beautiful in that, this is the spiritual component of astrological medicine, which itself can be so much dissection and analysis, and it doesn't actually capture the spirit of the
I agree.
One of my favorite medical astrologers, Jane Ritter-Patrick from Scotland, talks about the beauty of astrological medicine being in it's also treating the spirit part, but I've never heard it localized the way you shared. That's one of the things I think that
and I think, and again, it's, physical health, but it's also the construction of our soul, how that pattern can be manifest. So many people that come from a deeply spiritual background with very strong Neptune transit, Neptune patterns, and all their relatives now are alcoholics because they haven't found their way back to positive Neptune expression.
Right.
And that coming back to kind of where the tradition can be in the family could be pre-trauma that your family experienced 3 or 4 generations ago. What was the expression of that way back then? So it comes in all kinds of ways. But yes, we could talk about that forever. How do people reach you if they want to connect into the CAELI Institute? And what would they choose to go there for?
They are going to come here for the search parties, because every other Saturday, CAELI hosts a search party. And you're like, oh my God, who died? Search party? What's going on? Who's missing? The footnotes. We're missing the footnotes. We need to find the footnotes. We need to find the authors. We need to find the sources. Instead of calling it a member meeting, which sounds super boring and like, why would I go to another member meeting? I'm busy. I want to call it a search party. And CAELI also has a journal called the CAELI Review, which is a little bit delayed, but in the spirit of culture and cosmos, which was very delayed for a long, long time, I feel like that's okay. And
it comes at just the right time, like a wizard.
CAELI.institute, CAELI.institute. And please stop what you're doing and even go to Patreon, which is where our membership is located, and spend $4 to $8 to $10 a month supporting CAELI, because we actually do need more than 200 people to put their money where their mouth is and keep this place alive. Right now we have 130 members, but I'm really hoping to have a minimum of 200 by the end of the summer. And that's really important because there's brick and mortar here that are tangible earth things that I can't shift by sheer desire alone. So I've put in a lot of investment over the last 5 years to create this, but I need the community to rally and join CAELI so that we have a place for these books to stay safe and it's protected during the coming years, and that we can give this gift back to the future and the unborn people who are going to be learning astrology. So Patreon has tiers. If you're far away and you go, well, I'm not using the books, that's $4 a month. If you want to join the search parties, it's $8 a month, and they're very fun. If you enjoy maximalist astrology, breaking your astrology, meeting enthusiastic astrologers who are thinking complex thoughts about it, and or if you're listening and you don't know a thing about astrology but you love culture, you're welcome too. It's completely open to anyone who wants to chip in, and as a community, we can keep this place up and running. So yeah, please do join.
Fascinating. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And is there anything, last comment on what you would like to share with people about how to tune in and work with the lineup that we've just experienced in July?
I don't have anything rolling off the tip of my tongue about it. I feel like if it's aligned in your chart, you're probably already going through a thing that's perhaps. One thing I did see on the interwebs talking about all of this is talking about it as a womb instead of a basket. So I think that's a very pregnant metaphor to think about sort of what is percolating, right? If we think about what kind of percolating, we're still in this very new moment, and there's a lot under the surface that hasn't emerged yet. And so I just feel like by nurturing the thing that's true to you, that's emerging, and beginning to develop some muscle around being able to say it loud and let it come out in its time when it needs to emerge. But I still think like a plant that's just germinating under the soil, it's a little too sensitive at the moment for us to try to bear all. And so be protective of that energy, but also still give it that nourishment, soil conditions, and that kind of, treatment.
I agree. I think seeding is the word I think of most. That that this planted a seed. It's a very different forest that has been growing. What is beginning to nurture? How can you nurture the seeds that are being planted now in your life and in your culture and for a better world around us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Heather.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jenn. It's been a real pleasure, as always. But wonderful. You take care. And everybody go to Patreon and support the CAELI Institute and support astrological research. Thank you. Take care.